The void of hyperspace had always been a mystery to the Terrans. A silent, infinite expanse filled with both possibilities and dangers. But on that day, it seemed to carry an omen. The Aether, one of the most advanced ships in the Terran fleet, emerged from a dimensional jump into a forbidden sector of the galaxy. Its surface gleamed against the glow of a pulsating nebula, a symbol of hope and determination. The crew had no idea that this jump would thrust them into a storm of forces far greater than they could comprehend. On the bridge, Captain Darian Kale studied the holographic charts projected in front of him, his expression serious. A veteran of countless impossible missions, he was renowned for his ability to make quick decisions and his resolute demeanor. His subordinates respected him not only for his leadership but also for his humanity, a rare quality in times of war. "Captain, we've detected an anomalous energy signature ahead," reported Science Officer Lyra Vega, a brilliant and curious young woman with an unsettling fascination for the unknown. "It doesn't resemble anything we've encountered before." As Kale pondered, the sensors blared an alert. A colossal enemy fleet emerged from the shadows of the nebula, led by the dreaded Krelith civilization. These beings not only mastered technology but also shared a collective mind focused on galactic domination. From within their mothership, Archon Vraxis observed the Aether with disdain. "The Terrans are an insignificant distraction," he declared, a cold smile curving his lips. "We will crush them and show the galaxy that no species defies our territory." Back on the Aether, tension mounted. Kale analyzed the data alongside Riven Halleck, a talented yet cynical engineer whose inventions often saved the day, and nearly killed the crew in the process. "This is bad, Captain," said Riven, his tone lighter than the situation warranted. "They've got at least 3 times our firepower." Kale nodded, his mind working quickly on a plan. "And yet we'll find a way. There's always a weakness. We just need to uncover it." As the Krelith fleet approached, an unexpected communication came from the mothership. Vraxis' figure appeared in a holographic projection, his eyes radiating superiority. "Terrans, surrender now, and I promise your deaths will be swift. Resist, and you will witness the complete annihilation of your species." A tense silence filled the bridge, but Kale didn't hesitate. He rose to his feet and stared directly at the projection. "If you think we're as weak as you believe, you're about to discover the fatal error in your judgment." The transmission ended, and the battle was about to begin. The Krelith ships advanced swiftly, forming a pincer formation designed to trap the Aether. Their surfaces shimmered in hues of green and gold, suggesting a living technology pulsating with its own energy. On the Aether's bridge, the holographic displays revealed the imminent threat. "They're surrounding us," said Tactical Officer Mara Soren, her tone filled with urgency. "If we wait any longer, we won't have a way out." Kale studied the enemy's movements with a sharp eye. He knew patience would be just as crucial as strength in this moment. "Not yet. Let's observe. They expect us to strike first." Meanwhile, Riven worked frantically in the engineering bay, tweaking the ship systems to withstand the inevitable impact. "If these shields don't hold, we're screwed," he muttered, connecting cables and stabilizing the quantum matrix. Lyra, who had come down to assist, analyzed the energy patterns of the enemy ships. "Riven, look at this," she said, pointing to the data. "Their energy seems to converge into a single core. If we can overload it, we might trigger a chain reaction." Riven raised an eyebrow. "Easy to say, hard to do, but interesting." Back on the bridge, the first wave of Krelith attacks began. Beams of energy slashed through space toward the Aether, but the ship's shields activated, forming a bright blue barrier that absorbed the initial impacts. "Shields at 80%, Mara reported. Kale remained calm, though the tension in the air was palpable. "They're testing our resilience," he said. "We need to buy time for Riven and Lyra to finish what they're doing. Prepare limited counterattacks. Keep up the appearance of vulnerability." As the Aether returned fire with its kinetic missiles, taking down some of the smaller Krelith ships, Vraxis observed the battle with intrigue. "Interesting," he murmured as his subordinates relayed combat data. "They're more resilient than I expected, but still primitive." He ordered 2 of his frigates to advance, weapons charged, for a direct assault. "I want to see how they respond to more intense pressure," he said with a predatory smile. The Krelith frigate's assault was devastating. The Aether shuddered under the impact of the enemy's firepower as alarms echoed throughout the ship. "Shields at 50%, Mara reported, her voice steady despite the chaos. Kale kept his gaze fixed on the holographic display, calculating his next move. He knew he needed to take a risk. "Mara, drop the shields momentarily and divert all power to the kinetic missiles. Let's draw them in closer than they should be." Kale's plan worked. When the shields dropped, the Krelith frigates advanced, believing the Aether was vulnerable. But as they closed in, they were hit by a barrage of missiles that pierced their defenses and detonated their cores. The explosions lit up the void, and the Aether's crew let out a brief cheer. "Shields back to 30%, Mara said as she reactivated the defensive system. Kale knew the momentary victory came at a cost. "This will delay them, but we can't keep this up for long," he said, more to himself than anyone else. In the engineering bay, Riven and Lyra finally completed a prototype of an experimental device. The disruptive torus, an improvised invention that, if successful, could overload the Krelith's energy systems. "Will this work?" Lyra asked, her concern evident as she looked at Riven. He gave a half-smile. "It will, or it'll destroy us in the process." Lyra couldn't help but let out a nervous laugh. "Great. No pressure." They transmitted the update to the bridge. Kale listened intently and responded with determination. "Whatever it is, we need it ready in 15 minutes. It's our only chance." As the Aether caught its breath after the successful strike against the Krelith frigates, the crew knew time was running out. The enemy mothership remained stationary at a distance, seemingly observing, but its sensors revealed something alarming. "Captain, the Krelith are gathering energy in an unusual pattern," Lyra warned, her eyes fixed on the readings. "This isn't a typical attack. They're activating something bigger." Kale's face hardened. "Keep the shields stable and monitor. We can't react until we understand what they're doing." Inside the Krelith mothership, Vraxis personally oversaw the activation of their most powerful weapon, a gravitational manipulation system capable of trapping the Aether in a singularity. "They've proven more resilient than we imagined, but it doesn't matter. This device will crush them, physically and morally," he declared as his alien scientists adjusted the controls. To Vraxis, humanity was not just a minor enemy. It was a disturbing reminder of what younger species could achieve without the limitations of a collective mind. That thought infuriated him deeply. On the Aether, Lyra continued analyzing the readings, her fingers gliding swiftly over the holographic controls. "Captain, if these readings are correct, they're attempting to create a controlled singularity. If we're pulled into it, there's no way out." The crew fell silent for a moment until Mara broke the tension. "Then we can't let that happen." Kale nodded. "We need the disruptive torus sooner than planned." Turning to the communicator, he asked, "Riven, what's the status?" Riven replied in his usual mix of sarcasm and realism. "The torus is ready for testing, which means it could either blow up or save us all. We're on the edge, Captain." Kale closed his eyes briefly before responding. "We'll work with what we have. The only thing worse than failing is not trying." Riven sighed. "Well, I hope you liked the Aether, because she'll never be the same after this." The Krelith finally activated their gravitational weapon. From the space surrounding the mothership, a black sphere began to form, slowly expanding toward the Aether. The crew watched in horror as gravity distorted the environment, causing the ship's sensors to malfunction. "We're being pulled in," Mara shouted as the ship's engines struggled to maintain control. Kale stood, his gaze fixed on the hologram. "Riven, activate the torus. Now!" The command was clear, but the tension in the captain's voice was unmistakable. Riven activated the device. The disruptive torus unleashed an invisible wave of energy that traveled through space and collided with the Krelith's gravitational field. For a brief moment, everything stopped. The black sphere began to shrink as the Krelith mothership shook violently. "Captain, I think we did it," Lyra exclaimed, But Kale remained cautious. Not yet. Stay alert. He was right. Although the device temporarily disabled the gravitational field, the mothership was still operational, and Vraxis was furious. Inside the Krelith mothership, Vraxis slammed the control table in frustration. These humans, he muttered with disdain. They used something that shouldn't be possible. This isn't Terran technology. His eyes burned with a mix of rage and curiosity. Someone is helping these primitives. I want all remaining forces mobilized. We will destroy the Aether once and for all. Back on the human ship, Kale received an alert. Captain, we're detecting more ships inbound. This Krelith reinforcements. He took a deep breath and responded, prepare for battle. This is far from over. The Krelith reinforcements arrived like a storm. Smaller, fast, and deadly ships surrounded the Aether, while the mothership observed from afar, like a predator ready to strike. We're running out of options. Captain, Mara reported, her voice tense. The shields won't hold much longer. Kale kept his composure but felt the weight of the circumstances. Before he could respond, an unknown transmission interrupted the communications. The central hologram flickered, and suddenly, an alien figure unlike any they had ever seen appeared. The figure was translucent, almost ethereal, glowing softly in golden and blue hues. Its eyes, deep and inscrutable, seemed to observe every member of the crew. Terrans, the entity began, its voice reverberating as if it came from every corner of the ship. You have entered a war that is not yours, but your potential has drawn our attention. We are not your enemies, though that depends on the choices you make from this moment on. The crew was stunned. Even Kale, accustomed to extreme situations, took a moment to respond. Who or what are you? Kale asked, his voice firm but laced with distrust. The figure tilted its head, as if studying the captain. We are the Siren, observers and guardians of galactic balance. For ages, we have prevented the Krelith from becoming a threat to all life. But now, your species has interfered in this conflict. The Krelith see you as an extension of our influence, and for that, they wish to destroy you. The revelation hung heavily over the crew. Lyra was the first to speak. If the Krelith think we're your allies, why don't you help us directly? The Siren's response was blunt and cutting. Because we are not saviors. We are guides. You, Terrans, must prove that you are worthy of surviving in this universe. Only then can we offer our support. Before Kale could respond, a tremor shook the ship. The Krelith had resumed their attack, and the Aether shuddered under the force of their firepower. We're being pulled out of hyperspace, an officer shouted. The Siren looked at Kale one last time before disappearing. The decision is yours, Captain. Prove the worth of your species. The Aether's engines momentarily failed, leaving the ship vulnerable. Riven, however, managed to restart the main systems just in time. We're back online, but I don't know for how long, he reported through the comms. On the bridge, Kale quickly assessed the situation. He knew the ship couldn't withstand a prolonged assault. Mara, prepare the kinetic missiles. Target the weak points on the Krelith frigates. We need to create an opening. Mara hesitated for a moment. What about the mothership, Captain? They'll retaliate. Kale took a deep breath. If we don't do this, there won't be a mothership left to retaliate. The plan worked, at least initially. The Aether managed to destroy 2 enemy frigates, creating a small window for maneuvering. But the Krelith mothership didn't remain idle for long. A new type of weapon was activated, projecting a field that completely paralyzed the Aether. They've got us? Captain, Mara said as the ship's consoles flashed with system failure alerts. The crew was on the brink of despair when, suddenly, another wave of energy disrupted the field. The Krelith ships began losing power, as though something was directly interfering with their systems. It was the Siren again, but this time they didn't appear physically. Instead, their energy seemed to interact directly with the ship, strengthening its systems and destabilizing the Krelith. What's happening? Lyra asked as she tried to interpret the data. Riven, ever the cynic, replied, I think we're being helped, whether we like it or not. Kale watched the battle shift before his eyes. He knew the Siren were testing not just their strength but also their resolve. And somehow he felt this was only the beginning. The plan worked, at least initially. The Aether managed to destroy 2 enemy frigates, creating a small window for maneuvering. But the Krelith mothership didn't remain idle for long. A new type of weapon was activated, projecting a field that completely paralyzed the Aether. "They've got us?" "Captain," Mara said as the ship's consoles flashed with system failure alerts. The crew was on the brink of despair when, suddenly, another wave of energy disrupted the field. The Krelith ships began losing power, as though something was directly interfering with their systems. It was the Siren again, but this time they didn't appear physically. Instead, their energy seemed to interact directly with the ship, strengthening its systems and destabilizing the Krelith. "What's happening?" Lyra asked as she tried to interpret the data. Riven, ever the cynic, replied, "I think we're being helped, whether we like it or not." Kale watched the battle shift before his eyes. He knew the Siren were testing not just their strength but also their resolve. And somehow he felt this was only the beginning. On the Krelith mothership, Vraxis faced his own dilemma. He observed his dwindling fleet and the inconsistent data on the Aether. "These humans," he muttered with disdain. "They don't have the capability to do this on their own. The Siren are manipulating this war for their own interests." One of his commanders asked, "What do we do, Archon? Do we continue the pursuit?" Vraxis hesitated, something he rarely did. Finally, he answered, "Yes, but prepare the gravitational weapon. This time there will be no failures." Meanwhile, in the Aether's engineering lab, Riven and Lyra were busy fine-tuning the disruptive Taurus for a second use. "You know this thing almost destroyed us last time, right?" Riven said as he tightened a bolt on one of the connections. Lyra responded with a slight smile. "Yes, but almost isn't the same as did. Let's hope it stays that way." Despite the light-hearted exchange, both knew the ship's survival depended on their skill and a bit of luck. Back on the bridge, Kale was about to order the missile launch when a new transmission from the Siren interrupted his actions. This time, the message was different. "Terrans, you have proven more resilient than we imagined," the reverberating voice began. "But the decision has yet to be made. You must choose. Align with us in preserving galactic balance, or face the Krelith and any other enemies on your own. Choose wisely." The crew turned to Kale, awaiting his response. Kale felt the weight of the moment. He knew aligning with the Siren would mean temporary safety but also subjecting humanity to the oversight of a superior force. On the other hand, refusing could doom the Aether and possibly Earth to destruction. He replied in a firm but measured voice, "If you want our alliance, you need to prove you're willing to treat us as equals, not as pawns. Humanity is young, but we are not submissive." The message was sent, and silence enveloped the bridge as they waited for the response. The central hologram flickered, and the Siren figure reappeared. This time, there was something almost human in its expression. "Your response is intriguing, Captain Kale. Perhaps there is more to your species than we imagined." Before they could say more, the Aether systems detected a new energy surge emanating from the Krelith mothership. Vraxis had reactivated his gravitational weapon, this time at maximum power. "Captain," Lyra shouted, "they're pulling us directly into the gravitational field. If we don't act now, it's the end." Kale didn't hesitate. "Riven, the Taurus. Get ready to activate it." The gravitational field activated by the Krelith mothership began warping the space around the Aether. The ship's walls groaned under the extreme forces threatening to tear it apart. On the bridge, Mara shouted over the blaring alarms. "Captain, we're losing stability. The engines are overloaded." Kale gripped his chair tightly, keeping calm. "Riven, we need to activate the Taurus now." The engineer's response was swift. "I'm at the limit, Captain. Just a few more seconds." But time was against them. As Riven and Lyra frantically adjusted the final parameters of the disruptive Taurus, the Aether was pulled ever closer to the gravitational field. "We're out of time," Lyra yelled. Riven glanced at the controls, took a deep breath, and pressed the activation button. The device unleashed a burst of quantum energy, creating a shockwave that destabilized the Krelith gravitational field. For a brief moment, everything fell silent, as though space itself had paused. The Krelith mothership shuddered violently, its gravitational weapon collapsing in a flash of light. Aboard the Aether, the crew held their breath as the sensors resumed normal readings. "We did it!" Lyra exclaimed, almost in disbelief, but Kale remained focused. He knew the danger wasn't over yet. "Status on the enemy ships?" he asked, and Mara quickly replied, "They're disoriented but still operational. The mothership has taken severe damage but hasn't been destroyed." Kale nodded. "Prepare the missiles. Let's finish this before they regroup." On the Krelith mothership, Vraxis stood in silent fury. He watched as systems failed and his fleet lost cohesion. "This is unacceptable," he muttered as his subordinates scrambled to regain control. But something caught his attention. In the fragmented data they had on the disruptive Taurus, he noticed patterns that didn't seem human. "They've truly received help from the Siren," he concluded with a mix of anger and respect. "But this alliance will be their weakness. Ready the remaining forces. Let's give them something to remember." The Aether launched a fresh volley of missiles, this time targeting the most vulnerable points of the Krelith mothership. The resulting explosions were devastating, severing the ship's power and leaving it adrift in space. The Krelith fleet began retreating, realizing the battle was lost. On the Aether's bridge, the crew let out a collective sigh of relief, but Kale remained serious. "Don't lower your guard. This isn't over yet." He knew that while they had won the battle, the war was far from finished. The Siren reappeared, their presence radiating from the central hologram. "Terrans, you have proven yourselves to be more than we thought. Your resilience, though primitive, is admirable." The reverberating voice carried something resembling respect. "Now you must decide. Do you wish to ally with us to face the greater threats that will come? Or will you continue on your own, relying only on your limited strength?" Kale felt the weight of the decision. He knew that accepting the Siren's help would mean sacrificing part of humanity's independence, but refusing it could doom Earth to an even worse fate. Kale stood, looking directly at the Siren projection. "Humanity thanks you for your help, but if you wish for us to ally with you, it will be as equals. We will not be pawns in your cosmic games." The Siren figure tilted its head slightly, almost as if smiling. "Interesting, Captain. Perhaps your species holds more potential than we imagined. For now, we will consider your position. But remember, balance is fragile, and you have just entered a game far larger than you realize." With those words, the Siren disappeared, leaving the Aether and its crew in the silence of space. As the debris of Krelith frigates drifted in the void and the enemy mothership remained inert, the Aether finally had a moment of respite. On the bridge, the crew was exhausted but relieved. "We're alive," Mara said, almost in disbelief. Lyra, however, was focused on her terminal. "Captain, we're receiving residual data from the Krelith systems. It seems their fleet wasn't completely destroyed. They've retreated to a defensive position." Kale nodded, already aware that this victory wasn't final. "The war is far from over. But today, we showed them that humanity will not be subdued." In the engineering bay, Riven was making final repairs to the quantum core while chatting with Lyra. He began, "I don't usually think of us as heroes or anything. But I think, for a brief moment, we did something big." Lyra looked at him with a tired smile. "We did. But that doesn't mean it's over. This is just the beginning." Riven chuckled, his usual humor returning. "Great. Because I was really hoping for more impossible work." Despite the joke, they both knew that what they had faced was just a glimpse of what was to come. Kale called a meeting with his core team to discuss the next steps. "The Siren made it clear that we're in uncharted territory," he began. "They helped us this time, but they've also shown that they expect something in return. We can't trust them completely, but we can't ignore what we've learned either." Mara crossed her arms, ever pragmatic. "So what do we do, Captain? Prepare Earth for war or try to negotiate?" Kale answered firmly. "Both. Earth needs to know what we've faced and what's at stake. But we also need allies, even if they're complicated. As the Aether returned to hyperspace, Kale gazed at the vast starfield from the bridge window. He knew the decisions he had made that day would define humanity's future. "Captain," Lyra said, interrupting his thoughts, I think we did the right thing. I mean, we faced a force far greater than us and survived. That has to count for something." Kale turned to her, a faint smile on his face. "It counts for everything, Lyra. But what matters now is what we do next." His words were simple but carried the weight of everything yet to come. On the Krelith mothership, Vraxis, now filled with cold rage, watched as repairs were underway. Despite the defeat, his resolve remained unshaken. "The humans survived, but not for long," he said, his gaze filled with pure hatred. "The Siren won't be able to protect them forever. And when they fall, it will be us who finish them." Back on the Aether, Kale and his crew faced the unknown with renewed courage, fully aware that the universe was far larger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined, but also with the hope that, together, they could overcome any challenge.